Secretary. The gentleman from California, Mr. Royce, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Donovan, in your written testimony, you lay out the 4 priorities for the administration for a well-functioning mortgage market in the future. You say a widely available mortgage credit, housing affordability, consumer protection, and financial stability. And I think, in principle, these are all worthy goals. In practice, we've found that these can be competing interests, right? So looking back, would you agree that too much of an emphasis was placed on housing affordability and too little of an emphasis was placed on financial stability?
I do not agree that an overemphasis on housing affordability was the primary cause of the crisis that we saw. I believe that the affordability goals lacked clarity and that too often we mixed certain affordability goals without either clarity or precision with broader mandates, and that for affordability going forward, we need to have a much clearer set of objectives and mechanisms to achieve them. I think that's laid out in the testimony. However, I think if you look really at the facts of, for example, take the affordability goals at the GSEs, our recent study, which we presented to Congress on the causes of the financial crisis, looked in detail at the full range of loans that were eligible for the GSE affordable goals. It discounted all of the high-cost or riskiest loans. So just within the pool of good, low-interest rate loans that would have qualified for the affordable housing goals, the GSEs only purchased about a third of those loans. And so what does that mean? That means that they were not forced to go into risky lending to be able to achieve those goals.
Well, now wait a minute.
Well,
let me stop you there, because we had Secretary Geithner here last month, and he described how the GSEs used those goals to justify their purchases of subprime and Alt-A loans. He went over this, and over the years, those total roughly $1 trillion. Now, many have attributed those loans to making up the bulk of the losses of the GSEs. Numbers I've seen show that it's the vast majority of the losses. So based on Secretary Geithner's testimony and based on economists that have looked at this, they've come to a different conclusion there, and they see the $1 trillion in meltdown, that the GSEs were either holding in their portfolio or had guaranteed as a real problem, and have made the observation that, gee, the whole financial calamity started in this housing sector, and it started with the collapse of Fannie and Freddie.
So 2 things I would say about that. First of all, the large majority of the worst loans that led to this crisis were PLS, private label security loons, that were not ultimately GSE loans. They did buy a portion of those. But I don't think...
Let me ask you this, because I've looked at that countrywide.
I don't think it's right to say that the GSEs led into this crisis. There were plenty of other lenders who were doing this before.
Let me quote somebody from within Fannie who said, we went out and we bought countrywide, and the reason we were doing it every quarter was to send a signal to the market that if the government-sponsored enterprises were buying this and putting it in their portfolio, and if it were half of their portfolio, these subprime and Alt-A loans, half of $1.5 trillion, that was then a message to the rest of the market to do the same. Getting back to my opening statement, my worry here is that what wilted on the vine here was the market discipline. And one of the ways that we ran off market discipline and due diligence was that we implied a government backing and that we knew what we were doing in government when we put these goals out there, and we said, yes, these were safe purchases. That junk that was countrywide, that was held by Fannie and Freddie, and everybody else then began buying it. I mean, that's the concern I have with this approach.
And you and I agree, Congressman, first of all, that those, you call them junk loans,
Yes.
and I can't disagree, were the primary cause of the downfall of the GSEs. I agree. And Secretary Geithner and I agree on this as well. They were an enormous problem, and it was when they began buying those loans that we ended up heading down the path that we headed. Where I am disagreeing, and Secretary Geithner and I do not disagree about this point, the primary cause of their buying those loans was not, and I think if you look at the record, if you look at the report we did to Congress, was not driven by the affordable housing goals. They were chasing profits. They were allowed to buy those loans.
I carried the
Gentleman's
legislation
time
to stop them from doing it.
The
They lobbied
gentleman's
against
time
it.
has expired. We're well over.